I had a very painful breakup. It was emotionally incredibly heartbreaking. And at the same time, I got very physically sick. It was like a double whammy of my health being on the line and the relationship that I thought was going to be the relationship being on the line. And that drove me to that burning point, that crossroads that I was speaking of, where I'm like, no, enough is enough. I cannot repeat this story again. I have to find my way out, and I will. And how many of us have had that decision point where we're like, I'm done with this.
Welcome to Project Loving Myself, the podcast where we dive deep into the messy, beautiful journey of self-discovery, self-love, and healing. Welcome back to Project Loving Myself, the podcast that brings you back to yourself through real self-love. Most of us spend years trying to become someone, a better version, a more successful version, a more confident version, a more lovable version. Well, what if self-love isn't about becoming someone else? What if it's about finally understanding who you already are? Because so many women are living lives that look successful from the outside while feeling disconnected from themselves on the inside. They become who everyone needs them to become. The achiever, the caretaker, the strong one, the reliable one. And somewhere along the way, they lose touch with themselves. My guest today believes that before we can change our lives, we need to understand the stories that have been shaping them. Because you can't choose yourself if you don't know who you are underneath all that conditioning. Joining me today is Celinne Da Costa, master coach, speaker, USA Today bestselling author of The Burning Ground, and creator of the Story Atlas methodology. Through her work, Celinne helps people uncover the hidden stories influencing how they see themselves, what they believe they're worthy of, and how they show up in love, work, and life. Because sometimes self-love isn't about fixing yourself, it's about finally understanding yourself. Celinne, I am so looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. I am really looking forward to talk about love and vocation in the same breath.
Absolutely. And, these are things that are very important to most women. So I think, we got to make this one count. Celinne, you've said that learning to read the patterns in your own story is one of the deepest forms of self-love. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, of course. So one of the principles that I carry in my work is that your story is actually a map to your soul's curriculum. And if we can learn how to read the map, then we can also understand where that map has been leading us astray and away from ourselves. Because remember, the map does not mark the territory. Just because you have a map and it tells you this is what it looks like, doesn't mean that's actually the truth of what is going on of the terrain. And so when we look at our story and we start to perceive it as a map instead of what gets done, which is looking at it linearly, which is first I was born and then this happened and then that happened to me and then this happened and then that happened. And even when I work with leaders, entrepreneurs to help them to tell their story and they're looking at it this way, it's one way to look at it, don't get me wrong. Right? It's one way to tell a story. But if the ultimate goal is for us to connect with ourselves, to grow and to evolve and to actually understand the lessons that life is here to give us so that we can become a better version of ourselves, then that's a very limiting way of looking at it. But when we start to look at it as, okay, where in my map, aka where my story, what is it that my story has wanted me to learn? When we start to look at it from a different lens and we start asking deeper soul inquiry questions about why things happened the way they did, not as a way of trying to understand everything and why it happened and not as a mental body way, but more of a, okay, if my goal is to love myself and my goal is to grow and my goal is to expand into all that I'm here to be, what keeps repeating in my life? What people, situations, and circumstances can I see a recurring narrative of? And where in the map is my narrative getting stuck? Where is it being held up by shame? Where is it that I'm trying to hide it? Where is it that even if I am looking at it, I start to feel contracted? And if we can actually start to use it as a bit of a treasure map for us to find the places and spaces where we're actually feeling contraction, that is an invitation for us to go into that contraction and learn the lesson, resolve the contraction so that we can go back into expansion. And when we do that over and over and over again, something very miraculous happens. Not only do we come into deeper connection with ourselves and a deeper understanding of why we're here and what we've actually been given, the gifts we've been given this entire time, despite the trauma and the pain and the suffering. But we can also then more clearly tell the story of who we've become looking backwards. We can tell the story.
Now, Celinne, I understand the map and the life story and the journey. Here's what I want to kind of bring us back to is, why would someone need to or want to understand their story in the first place? Like, why would someone have this desire or even come to you to be like, I need to understand my story. I need to understand what happened. So what kind of a situation would make that something that they need to do?
So let me ask you this question first before I answer this. Where do desires come from?
Desires could come from something we are inspired by. It could be somebody else's desire that has become ours.
Talk about ours, our desire. Let's just assume it's nobody else's. Where does our desire come from?
Our desire, wow, you're putting me to the test now. Okay. Our desires comes from where we are and where we would like to be. So kind of the gap between where we are and where we would want to be is our desire.
Yeah. So that's a description of it. Where does this energy that I just desire this thing come from? That's the pause that you're having, by the way, is exactly, it comes from somewhere. But I think what we can agree on is that it's not coming from the mind. You're not saying, hey, I desire this thing. And then you're like, actually, no, that's not convenient for me. So I'm going to undesire that.
Right. We're not logically trying to it's not a logical process of being like,
that's right.
Okay, I'm going to desire this next. It's
right.
usually
and I'm going to like not desire it, which, would be so convenient for so many of us to just not desire what we desire, because oftentimes, more often than not, that desire is actually leading somewhere that is not where we currently are. Very often, very much outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
So think about the desire is a compass. It's the true north as opposed to the magnetic north, which is our conditioning, what we've been told to want, what we've brainwashed ourselves to think is the acceptable thing to do and want is the magnetic north. But the true north is where our desire is, because it's going to propel us toward where we are actually meant to be. And we can't control it.
So when you're saying desire, right, Celinne, you're really talking about purpose or some kind of feeling within us of needing to be somewhere or go somewhere or have something.
Yes. Have you ever had the feeling of, I want more. I'm meant for more.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of us have had that same
feel
feeling.
that in your body, or is that in your head?
No, completely in your body.
Yeah. And what's the texture of it for you? Like when it's in your body and you're like, gosh, I want more. Like if you were to somatically describe it.
Oh, for me, it's like exploding outside, like out of my body. Cannot be contained.
Yeah. It's like a fire. Yeah. And this is what I refer to as the burning point. It's a moment where you're burning, and it's that crossroads where your desire for more, to actually like step towards what you're here to be and who you're here to be and what's calling you in, is going to be stronger than the pain, than staying comfortable.
It's the thing that moves you, and it may make no sense at all. You don't even know why you should do it or whether you need to do it, but you just have to do it.
Right. That's right. So there's your true north. Now, if you have a compass, but you don't know where you're going, where are you going? And there's no map. The function of knowing what the story is not to analyze or like look at every single moment of your story and understand where it came from, why that happened. It's certainly useful and sometimes entertaining. And it has a place in space if you really, really, really want to know why you're like this or where this traumatic experience came from. There's an entire world of healing for that. That's not the conversation we're having, though. We're having the conversation of, okay, if I am moving towards that which I'm being called for, and my desire is my true north that's sending me there, even though it's completely uncharted territory, it's good to know what the old story is, the one that you're leaving behind, so that you're actually able to understand If you're going into new uncharted territory, you need to know where you came from to also understand if you're repeating the same patterns of the past. And so to know your story is a version of knowing yourself, but knowing the version of you that you're letting go of.
And this is important because you don't want to repeat those certain patterns because they're going to get in the way of the desire or of getting to that desire, fulfilling that desire. Is that what you mean?
The patterns are basically going to be a gravitational pull towards your magnetic north.
The conditioning.
Yes. Yes. And when you're walking towards uncharted territory with your true north, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be unknown, but you're being guided by that something bigger than yourself. You could call it your future self. You could call it life. You could call it soul, right? But if you are not conscious and not aware of the story that you came from, then it's going to be a very gravitational pull for you to unconsciously slip back into the inherited story and therefore repeat the patterns of the past.
Okay, so these stories, right, the ones that we don't want to slip back into, how do they shape the way we show up in our relationships, perhaps our career, our everyday lives? Like, why is this something we do not want to be repeating or getting pulled towards and therefore away from the desires?
Yeah. So why is it something we don't want to be repeating? Because it doesn't feel good. It's actually that simple. It feels like, crap. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like suffering. It feels unaligned. It feels like not what you're here to be. And I'll use a tangible example, and I'll pull from my own life archives, especially this is like a love podcast. And I've done a lot of my own podcasts about my story, which is I came from a household where romantic love was modeled as being very toxic and very emotionally dysfunctional. As a result of seeing that play out, it transferred basically a template for me on how love was supposed to be, which looked something like anxious woman, emotionally unavailable man who doesn't treat me well, right?
Mm-hmm. You're pretty much echoing my life story, but okay.
I think I'm echoing a lot of women's stories. So as girl grows up, what she's doing is she's attracting characters in her movie that continue to replay the original story that was installed. Why? Because the subconscious mind wants to be like, I want to be done with this movie. Let's finish the movie. Let's finish it because I want to be done with this because there's something inside that's like, this isn't healthy. This isn't expansive. This is not evolution.
Right.
Which is what we're inherently wired to do. So what girl will do is she will continue to invite new characters into her movie to finish the movie, and she will try really, really hard. Like, okay, this time with all my tools and my self-development, like this time I will change the movie. And then maybe there's a plot twist. Maybe there's something different. But ultimately, it's pretty much the same movie again and again and again and again.
So basically, the girl, okay, you or me, is trying to fix her story that she grew up with. The more she tries to fix it in her current situations, the more like quicksand she gets kind of like starts drowning in those stories and just ends up recreating the same story instead of fixing the whole thing, which is what she set out to do.
And beyond that, she's working really hard. She's working really hard and she's burnt out and she's exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And yet continues to find herself in the same loop and asking herself why.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, girl will do something like, what's wrong with me? And self-attack.
Yep.
What's wrong with me that I can't, da, 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 da.
Right.
But the issue is, there's nothing wrong with girl, is that she doesn't understand that she keeps playing out the old map in magnetic north, so she is really not going to get anywhere.
Quick pause. Do you ever feel like you keep ending up in the same place? Same situations, same feelings, same patterns, even though you're trying so hard to change? There's usually a reason for that. If this resonates with you, I'd love to help you make sense of it. Book a Make It Make Sense call with me, and together we'll connect the dots, uncover the pattern underneath it, and get clear on what needs to change. Because when you understand the pattern, you stop repeating it. The link is in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
Right. She'll just recreate the same design.
Same map and a compass that's pointing nowhere.
Yep.
It's pointing back into the map.
Yep.
So, of course, the wheel is going to keep spinning. That's why it's very important for a girl to become aware. And so for me, for example, it was my moment of, and by then I have been doing this work for half a decade. So I had some awareness on how to change myself, but I hadn't applied what I knew yet into this aspect of my life. And I had a very, very painful breakup where it was just, and without going into story of it, it was emotionally incredibly heartbreaking. And at the same time, I got very physically sick. And so it was like a double whammy of my health being on the line and the relationship that I thought was going to be the relationship being on the line. And that drove me to that burning point, that crossroads that I was speaking of, where I'm like, no, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I cannot repeat the story again. I have to find my way out, and I will. And how many of us have had that decision point where we're like, I'm done. I'm done with this. I talk about it in my book as well, in Burning Ground. It's that moment where you're like, I'm changing this story. And from that moment, that's when I was able to take all of the tools that I had learned and actually start to apply them into this area of my life and completely transform the way I love myself, the way I respect myself, the way I relate to the masculine, all of it. But it required me to get very honest about what my actual hidden desire, the desire underneath the desire was, like what my true north was. And it actually required me to head into uncharted territory, but with the knowledge of where I've been and understanding that so that I don't repeat the same mistakes as I go into the new way of being. Now that I've made it to the other side and I've gone through a healing journey within myself, I actually, funny enough, next week on my podcast, I have my former partner who I was with for a year and a half. He's coming on my podcast and we're going to be talking about our beautiful relationship and our incredible conscious uncoupling experience. So I've made a complete 180 from that moment. But now I can tell that entire story of my past just the way that I did now. And it's medicine. It's no longer a perpetuation of my pain and my suffering and what's wrong with me. When I share my story now of who I used to be, it's medicine for the woman who I'm sharing it with, rather than poison.
Beautiful. Now, one of the powerful things that you did was to become aware of your patterns, not wanting to repeat them anymore, right? That was the liberation from that cycle. A lot of women get stuck, Celinne, hating on themselves, criticizing their patterns, blaming themselves, and they can't make it past that to then make different choices and attract different things. So what are your thoughts about that? Like why do women get stuck there? And what is a better way to approach that?
Mm-hmm. So why do women get stuck there? Aside from, the individual to individual answer to this, the collective answer is really conditioning. Since we were little girls, we are taught to look in. Are you being the good girl conditioning, right? Are you being a good girl? And it's very much like looking inwards as opposed to, for example, little boys are taught to look outwards. They're rewarded for the external things that they do. And we are rewarded for how we behave and how we are. And so because of that, we literally grow up with this like inward. And because we're also, our nature as women is to be, we're tracking multiple things at the same time. Like we're also designed differently, but we're taught to do that, to self-attack. Look at our conditioning and how we are consistently taught that we need to look a certain way and we need to be able to do all the things and we need to be a good girl, but we also need to be sexy, but we also need to be a working woman, and we also need to be independent. And the incredible pressure that is put on us societally to do all the things, and we have to be moms, by the way. And it's like, what? And so it's very common. Any woman that's listening to this, I really want you to hear that this piece around the self-attack and the criticism and what's wrong with me. What if that's not you? What if that's not the true essence of who you are and who you're here to be? What if that is a behavioral pattern, which you can stop, and I recognize it might be challenging, and there's a journey around that. But we can put it down eventually and take our power back in this process. Because it goes back to that question you asked before. Why would we want to chase our desire? Like, what is that even? Well, what came to me in my mind was, well, depends. Do you want to be free? Do you want to be authentically expressed? Do you want to be in your power? Do you want to be who you're here to be? Do you want to create more in your life that is in alignment with said expression? If the answer is yes, then yes, it is time to claim your desire. If the answer is yes, then yes, it is time to look at your story and zoom out from a bird's eye perspective and start looking at it as curriculum. So instead of being victimized by it, you can actually use that story as, what I share even in my website, like, to become the greatest story you ever told. It's your fodder. It's your hero's journey. It is what you get to use as prima materia, as they say in alchemy, like it's the prime material that we cook for us to turn the lead into gold. So when we start to see it this way, then everything is material for your greatness.
So for someone who is struggling with this, right? How do they start? How do they go about separating who they truly are from who they've been conditioned to become, right? How do they kind of separate and then start to get to know or start to develop their more authentic selves?
Yeah. So this is actually where my Story Atlas methodology comes in, which is really the journey that we take in order to become our most authentic self and tell the story forward from that place. And so the first phase of this work is actually simple. I say that with a wink because it's simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple, which is it's the awakening. It's actually just seeing the story. It's just locating yourself on the map. If I asked you, hey, where are you right now? And you would take a moment and, well, I'm in my house. Where's your house? This number, this street. That's where you are. Oh, but I don't like my house. I don't like my house. I didn't ask you if you didn't like your house. I'm asking you, where's your house? But I want to live there instead. Where do you live now?
Right. The objective truth of where you are.
It's, yes, the objective truth of where you are, which even going back to the story is, okay, here's where I am. I attract men that are emotionally unavailable. I have issues with anxiety in a not self-attack, self-criticism way, right? Like completely neutral. Here's where I'm at right now. Diagnosis.
You're like reporting that, these are the facts of what's happening in my life. No judgment.
No judgment.
I hear you.
Here's where I'm at. This is the family upbringing that I had. This is where I'm seeing the results in my life. Because if we start to actually see our reality as a mirror reflection of our story, then we know that when we change the story, our reality, the movie is going to change. It's going to update itself. And the characters are going to change. But first, we just need to understand, like, here's where I'm at in the movie. This is the scene. And if we can get really honest and sober about that, that's already step one, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And, the next step that people will come up against is, yeah, but what do I do about it? And that's a whole conversation. But the first step is open your eyes, get sober. Where are you right now? Objectively, without self-attack, without criticism. This is the reality.
And are we taking responsibility yet at this point?
I like to think we want to take the earlier the better. The earlier the better. And it's a sensitive topic to. There's a lot of nuances to we're taking responsibility, right? There's a lot of nuances in this conversation, which in today's conversation we don't have the scope to get into in the sense of the whole phrase. It's not your fault. It is your responsibility. So we're not talking about emotional or spiritual bypassing of your experience. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about divine neutrality without emotional bypassing. Like that happened, and maybe there's still some unresolved pain. Perhaps there's still trauma that needs to be presenced. That doesn't make it mutually exclusive from you just having a sober look and realizing, okay, I see it now.
Okay, there's something you said that I really like, something I say a lot myself and I resonate with. You've said you can't choose yourself if you don't know yourself, right? Now, what are some signs, Celinne, from your perspective, that a woman is disconnected from herself, that she doesn't really understand who she is? She's not connected to herself. What would that look like for someone else to recognize that in their own life?
So the first thing that jumped out at me immediately when you asked that question is she can't feel her womb.
Okay, talk to me about that.
Yeah. So our womb, our hearts, they're but more the womb, is our power center. It's where our power comes from. It's literally where creation comes from. And so what I have found in my work is when a woman feels disconnected to her womb, her power center, that is when she feels disconnected to herself. Because ultimately, when we're talking about connection, the question here is, do you feel yourself? We're talking about presence, and not just presence, the thing in front of you, presence at, oh, my children are here, or the car is here, the grocery store is there. Like, that's not what I mean by presence. It means I am here and I am connected to my desire, not the one that you were saying before, not got enmeshed with. And so now I think it's my desire but it's not. It's just, I'm getting enmeshed with someone else's needs. It's a very clear, I am here. This is my desire. And it can be felt first and foremost in the womb, and it can be felt in the heart. And just to get a little bit more granular on this, when I'm teaching this in my work, in my programs, we have a womb voice, and there's actually a heart voice, and there's a mind voice, and the textures can be felt. Like when a woman speaks from her womb, from like boom in there, you can feel it. But then if I start to talk from my head, if I'm like really starting to think about like what it is that I want to say and put all the energy in my head, you can probably tell that the texture changes. And when I put myself in my heart, the texture also changes. And what I'm going to say changes as well. Mm-hmm. There's a different texture, but then when I go back into my womb, there's a gravitas, there's a pull. And that's what I have found in my experience and as I've supported women, and also just witnessing again and again and again, that ultimately our wisdom comes from within. And there's just like the map concept, we can literally locate it within ourselves.
Now, you said the womb. Do you think this has anything to do also with our experiences as babies in our mother's womb? And the programming that we bring in from that experience, then affecting our own kind of sense of personal power, or, you talk about the womb voice as having that gravitas. So it is that sense of like personal identity or power that we do sometimes or often get from our mother, our conditioning from our mother, or our relationship with our mother. So any thoughts on that? And our grandmother, right? It's the female line.
100%. And I can't tell you how many times, both in my lived experience as well as facilitating women through this process, when we're like, we're not able to locate where the voice got stuck, where the voice got bent, where the story got bent, and we can't locate it within this timeline. How many times we've had to actually go prenatal because it's not in the lived timeline, but it's actually like during conception or preconception. Because think about it this way, like as you are in your mother's womb and your mother's feeling incredibly stressed, she's feeling like scarcity, and she's feeling unsafe, and she's feeling like she doesn't have enough, all of that is getting absorbed by the fetus. And by the time this baby is born, that's already your inheritance. And a lot of people live their entire lives that way, with their inherited story of scarcity, this inexplicable scarcity and fear and patterns that is even more confusing when your actual life doesn't fully mirror these things that you're feeling. I've heard this story a lot of times, like I grew up pretty decently in a good childhood. I don't have any like big traumas. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I not able to, why am I attracted? Why is this my movie? Why is this going on? And that's more when we get into more like nuances of this work is, we have our story, but then we also have our ancestor story, including our parents. And so all of that is in culturally, the culture that we are born in.
So it's like layer upon layer of stories that often limits us in who we or how we show up. It limits us from going beyond these structures, this conditioning that tells us we must be like this or like that, whether that comes from genetic or culture or even our past experiences. How difficult would it be to break through that? And then go ahead, because I know you wanted to say something about that too.
So the short answer to how difficult depends what kind of life experience you're looking for. If you want the struggle and if that's the commitment that you have to your life, then that's going to be very difficult and there's going to be a lot of suffering. But if you're committed to it being something that you play, like a game, then it can be a lot more fun. The commitment I made in how I wanted to navigate this, because, I went through the sludge, I went through the density, I've been through like just shoveling shit for years and years and years, wondering, when am I going to heal? When am I going to be okay? When am I going to feel like I'm okay? And then I hit this point where like my nose was above the water. I'm like, why? I mean, like, this is really tough and I don't like this. And I remember my mentor at the time was like, you could stop anytime you want and you can literally make a request. You could say, hey, God, source, universe, soul, like, give it to me at the rate at which I can easily integrate. I was like, wait, that's an option on the table? Like, I can just integrate it at my pace without having to shovel all the things all the time? And then the moment I made that request and I made that decision,
It's a choice.
yeah, I was like, oh, cool. Like, I can heal and grow and like evolve and live a life that's really beautiful and rich. All of it at the same time, which is, an expansion of emotional capacity. But there's something I wanted to respond to, the piece around the inherited story, right? Because I want to make it like, I want people listening to this to not walk away being like, oh shit, I have so much inner work to do. But actually, there's a really, really bright side to the story here, is that your inheritance is your inheritance. And some of it, you're like, think about it this way. Like, you have a grandparent that, goes, and this grandparent has a house full of stuff. And you got to go and clean up that stuff because you are the one who has the job. And you're going through piles of things. And you're like, why did grandpa keep this old ass, like, broken vase? Like, it's so ugly. I'm giving this away. Like, I'm releasing this. But then you find that incredible, like, family heirloom, like that incredible, like, watch that works, like the Rolex that is, you're like, how has this been sitting in a drawer?
Jackpot. Yeah.
What? Right? And so when we look at your inherited story, you come in with a set of conditioning, a set of programs, a set of inheritance. And as you awaken to your life experience and you exercise your free will as a soul to choose the experience that you're actually here to have in this lifetime, you also awaken to the choice that you have of, I actually don't want this stuff because it's not serving me for where I'm choosing to go in my life. But this set of things that I've inherited are perfectly great. And I'm taking them with me. Because think about, like, when I think about, I have an Italian passport. Are you kidding me? Jackpot. Where I grew up, jackpot. The city that I'm from, the patterns, the values that were instilled in me since I was a child shaped me into the woman that I am today. There's so much gratitude that I have for the upbringing that I had that made me exactly into the woman that I am today, which is a woman that I love. Great. And there's also a lot of baggage that I just didn't need.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stories that didn't belong to me and that were not aligned with my true north, which is my desire, which, hello, I can't choose it. All I can do is listen to it, which is what we do. The more we connect to ourselves, the more we drop into our body's wisdom, into our womb wisdom, we can hear the transmission of what that desire is with much more clarity and way less interference.
In a nutshell, we get to decide what we want to keep and what we want to release, right?
Yeah.
We get to decide who we want to be.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong answer. This is the coolest thing. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no, like, you should have been this. You should be like this, which is, that little insidious voice. Why didn't you do it this way? I should. Why can't I be? Why am I not being? It's actually a question of, who am I choosing to be?
I love that. Now, what we talk about a lot on Project Loving Myself is self-love.
Mm-hmm.
So as someone who's a big advocate of it, right? Tell me how you see self-love play into all of this.
So why do we do any of this? I mean, this podcast, like, why are you listening to this? Why would you bother? Of all the things you could be doing with your life, you're here with us. And something that really changed the way that I related to my life and to self-love is I realized, what if everything I'm doing is coming from self-love? What if all of it is actually either my attempt for it, to reach out for it, or me practicing it? And if I'm not practicing it, if I'm harming myself with the toxic behavior that I'm engaging in, what if that is the way that, because of my upbringing, because of my inherited story, it's a convoluted way defense mechanism, coping mechanism that I'm engaging in so that I can get to love. And when I started to see that whatever I'm doing, this is what I'm trying to get at, is how do I come back to love? Then it becomes a clear filter to realize, okay, this behavior that I'm engaging in, is this loving to myself? And if the answer is yes, I'm going to do more of it. And if the answer is no, what am I doing that is actually trying to lead me back to loving myself? Like, why text this man that didn't get back to me? Well, because there's something in me that is procuring and wanting healthy love. It's just that the behavioral pattern is off because it's an inherited story that needs to be rewritten.
So it's amazing because I think we've kind of come back to the beginning of this conversation, which was about the conditioning and the desire, right? And so maybe self-love is the desire. And every time we go against self-love, we do something that is like self-harming emotionally. I don't mean like physically, but like emotionally, energetically, and so on. We are playing into the conditioning. And so maybe it really is all about two things. Are we in service of ourselves? Are we loving ourselves? Or are we hating on ourselves and not honoring what our true north is, our true, desire, our true purpose, our true path in life. And so I feel like we have essentially brought this conversation down to what it really is about, which is that our story can either be a loving expression of who we are or not a very loving expression of who we have been conditioned to be.
Chills. That's
right?
it. Mm-hmm.
That's it. Oh my God.
And we have a choice.
And we have a choice.
In that matter.
We get to decide.
Choose the story. We get to choose it.
We get to choose it.
And we get to actually author it as we go along.
I love that. Celinne, this was such an interesting, deep conversation that I think, deserves a listen from everyone who is following Project Loving Myself. Now, something I do with all my guests before we close the episode is I ask my guests for their Project Loving Myself mantra. That message that perhaps has inspired them or something they would like to share with our listeners today. What would you like to say?
There's actually a prayer that I say to myself multiple times a week that I would love to share. And I feel a little, I actually haven't done this before in a recording because I usually just do it to myself. So bear with me because I want to gather the words from my memory and I might stumble upon them, but it's the one that comes through. So it's the one I want to do. Okay. So here's a prayer that gives me a lot of strength. I choose to trust the great genius unfolding in my life. I give thanks to the grace now flowing into my heart. I have no need to know. I trust in the innate perfection of my being unfolding with intelligence and wisdom. God, who loves me unconditionally, holds me in his loving protection. I choose to release all of the stories, attachments, fantasies, and fears held me back from living my heart's desires fully. I now choose unconditional trust in the loving genius of life to lead me into my fulfilled destiny now. So be it.
That was beautiful. Amazing. Celinne, thank you so much for being with me, for being with us on Project Loving Myself. Can you share how people can follow you, learn a little bit more about what you do, and get in touch?
Of course. So to learn more about what I do, my work, my programs, and also to get your hands on my incredible book, The Burning Ground, you can go to CelineDaCosta.com. I suppose that's going to be in the show notes as well, right? CelineDaCosta.com. So go there to just come dive into my world. I super invite you to step into my universe. I'm very prolific on the internet. And I also have my own podcast called It's Not What You Think. And you can follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, at Celinne Da Costa. And and I would say website, social media, and my book, theburningground.com.
Beautiful. Thank you again, Celinne, for being here and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
What stayed with me from this conversation with Celinne is that self-love is really about understanding your story and then deciding if that's the one you want to keep or whether you want to tell a completely different one. And I love how it is, it is a different lens from how I speak about self-love, but I think that's what is so beautiful, is that we can tell that story about self-love in so many different ways. And every perspective adds more understanding, more texture. That's a word Celinne used a lot. And I find that it is so fitting. It's like we're layering these textures and these different perspectives over each other to help us just move forward, to help us grow and to help us expand ourselves in the most positive of ways. Now, a key thing from what we talked about is about taking the time to understand who we are so that we can really love ourselves. That's another thing I really wanted to highlight. I mean, many of us can spend our entire lives without getting curious about the stories that have been shaping us. So this episode was a reminder to take that time, to stay curious, to ask yourself those questions, and to make choices about who we want to be, not who we are by default. As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So the first thing we need to do is to face our past and understand the stories we've been telling ourselves, the stories we've been living and playing out in our lives. And that truly is where self-love begins. Not with fixing yourself, not with becoming someone new, but having the courage, making the choice to understand yourself more deeply. Because when you understand your story, you stop fighting yourself and you start choosing yourself. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who perhaps has not taken the time to truly understand their story and should probably be doing that right now. Follow me at Sanaya Gurnamal on all channels. Until next time, you are loved.